Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. They say that in every town, there are families you just don't talk about. People whose windows are always shut, even in summer. Families who walk the same crooked path to church every Sunday, but never sit in the front pews. They smile politely, but their eyes, if you look too long, show something else. Something you can't name. I was told about her by accident. An old man in a bar, his voice half drowned in whiskey, leaned over and said, "She had two fathers, both brothers, and everyone knew." Then he laughed. Not the kind of laugh that's joyful, more like the kind that keeps you from screaming. Her name was Mary Louise Carter. She was born in the summer of 1938 in a small, suffocating town along the Mississippi River. You could stand on the bridge at night and hear the water slap against the banks, the sound carrying into the dark like something alive. Her birth should have been like any other, another baby swaddled and placed in a wooden crib. But the Carters weren't like other families. Mary's father, legally, was Samuel Carter. But Samuel's younger brother, Thomas, had been living in the same house for years, sleeping under the same roof, sharing the same meals, and, people whispered, the same wife. No one could say for sure whose child Mary was, because she was both. The story was buried deep. No birth records had been altered, no public scandal recorded in the paper, but people remembered, because they couldn't forget. Her face held something strange, the eyes too close together, the skin pale and waxy, a way of walking that seemed uneven, and she had a mind that, as she grew, seemed caught somewhere between a child's playfulness and an old wubwa's man's vacant stare. Some said she was cursed. Others said she was simply the result of blood that had turned back on itself too many times. But the truth, the real truth, is much worse. And it starts long before Mary ever took her first breath. It begins with a pact made between two brothers, and the woman they both claimed as theirs. By the time the Carter brothers were young men, the family name was already marked by whispers. Their father had been a violent man, and their mother, her own cousin. That detail was never spoken aloud, but it clung to the bloodline like a stain no amount of time could wash away. Samuel, the elder by 3 years, was steady, slow to speak, and burdened with the sense of duty that often comes from being firstborn. Thomas, on the other hand, had a restless spirit and a mean streak that could turn from charm to cruelty in seconds. Yet, for reasons no one could quite understand, the two were inseparable, working the same fields, sleeping in the same cramped bedroom well into adulthood, and later, sharing the same woman. Her name was Eliza May. She arrived in town in 1932, a pale slip of a girl with a suitcase that looked too heavy for her frame. No one knew exactly where she came from. She never spoke of her past, only that she needed work. The Carters took her in, and before long, Samuel married her. On paper, it was a simple story. In reality, it was the opening move in a quiet, unsettling arrangement. You see, the Carter home was not a place of walls and boundaries. It was a place where the same shadows fell across every room, where the creak of a floorboard at night could be any of them, moving from bed to bed. Neighbors noticed that Samuel and Thomas never courted other women. They never had separate lives, and Eliza, though she wore the ring Samuel gave her, seemed to belong to both. Some nights, lantern light would glow behind the upstairs curtain, the three of them talking, or something more, in low voices that carried just enough to make you wonder. And in a town that believed in minding its own business, wondering was all anyone did. When Eliza became pregnant, it was quietly accepted that the child would be Samuel's, but the resemblance Mary would bear to Tom, his high cheekbones, the slight downturn of his mouth, would become impossible to ignore. And yet, the Carter brothers treated her as if she belonged equally to both. Two fathers, one child, one unspoken truth. But this wasn't just about who fathered Mary. This was about the blood itself, blood that had been folding inward for generations, pulling tighter and tighter until something had to break. Mary's early years were marked by a strange, almost unsettling kind of attention. The Carter brothers hovered over her like watchmen guarding a secret, their lives revolving entirely around her needs, her moods, her small, faltering steps. Samuel called her Little Dove, while Thomas preferred Sweet Thing. She answered to both without hesitation, as if she'd been taught not to recognize a difference between them. From a distance, she might have looked like any child in the town, running barefoot through the dust, clutching a rag doll stitched from flour sacks. But up close, people noticed things. The way her left eye seemed to wander when she was tired, the way her speech was slow to come, her words carefully shaped, as if each one was a stone she had to carry in her mouth before letting it fall. Eliza, once bright-eyed and girlish, began to fade. She took to sitting by the window, staring out at the fields for hours. Some said she looked like a prisoner waiting for her sentence to end. Others whispered she had been promised freedom once Mary was born, freedom that never came. By then, Thomas had taken to calling her mine in front of Samuel. Samuel never corrected him. The town tolerated the Carters because they had always been there. They owned enough land to make themselves useful, and in a place where winters could be cruel, usefulness mattered more than morals. But even the most stoic neighbors felt uneasy when they saw Mary with both men, one holding her left hand, the other her right, as though she were a prize they shared. By the time Mary was 6, the signs of inbreeding were becoming clearer: a narrow jaw, a slight curvature in her spine, periods of strange vacant stillness where she'd simply stare at a wall, humming a sound no one recognized. And yet, Samuel and Thomas seemed proud, almost defiant. The schoolteacher tried to intervene, suggesting that Mary might need special lessons, maybe even medical care from the city, but the brothers refused. They claimed city doctors would fill her head with poison and make her think she wasn't right. It was then the teacher realized Mary's world was not meant to expand. The Carter brothers had built her a cage made of blood and silence, and she would grow up inside it. What no one knew yet was how far they were willing to go to keep her there. As Mary grew into her teenage years, the unspoken boundaries around the Carter home became ironclad. She was never seen in town without at least one of the brothers walking beside her, and often both. The few times she wandered alone, it didn't last. Someone would spot her, and within minutes Samuel or Thomas would appear, leading her back by the arm, their faces set in that same unreadable expression. The people in town pretended it was simply overprotectiveness, but there was another truth lurking beneath. Mary didn't seem to know how to speak to boys her own age, or anyone really, outside the 3-person bubble of her family. When the store clerk once asked her if she wanted a paper sack for her groceries, she just looked at him, blinking, before turning to Thomas for an answer. It was as though she had been taught, carefully, deliberately, that her words were not hers to give away. Her appearance was changing too. The asymmetry in her face had become more pronounced. Her voice carried a strange, lilting accent that didn't match the town's, as if the shape of her mouth never quite formed the words right. But what unsettled people most was her eyes, pale, unblinking, and far too still. Eliza, once the axis of this strange triangle, began to withdraw completely. She no longer went into town, no longer spoke above a whisper. Some claimed she had gone touched in the head, the weight of years spent in that house finally breaking her. Others said she had made her peace with something far darker, that she had simply accepted her role as a vessel for the brothers' legacy, and now her usefulness was spent. And then came the night of the church social. Mary was 16. She arrived with both brothers, wearing a white dress that looked more like a wedding gown than a Sunday frock. The entire room went silent when they walked in. The brothers didn't notice, or pretended no, but 2. They guided Mary to a table in the corner, each placing a hand on her shoulders like sentinels. It was that night that Reverend Mills, who had served the town for 30 years, finally admitted to his wife that the Carters weren't right, that something in their blood had curdled long ago, and if it wasn't stopped, he feared, it wouldn't end with Mary. But by then, it was already too late. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Mary's 17th birthday came and went without celebration, but something shifted in the Carter household. People in town began noticing lights burning in the upstairs windows long past midnight. Neighbors passing by claimed they could hear voices, not arguing, not quite, but murmuring low and urgent, like a conversation they didn't want the walls to overhear. And then, Mary stopped coming into town altogether. The explanation was thin. Samuel told the grocer she was learning to keep house and had no time for foolishness. Thomas told the blacksmith she had taken ill and shouldn't be around strangers. 2 stories, both delivered with the kind of certainty that dared you to question them. Weeks turned into months. The only sign of Mary came one summer afternoon when the schoolteacher walking past the Carter property saw her standing in the upstairs window. Her hair hung long and uneven, as though it hadn't been properly cut in years. Her dress was a pale thing that looked like it had once been white, and her face, still pale, unblinking, stared down at the dirt road as if she didn't quite remember what it was for. By then, Eliza was almost entirely invisible. Rumors spread that she had taken to her bed, that she no longer spoke to anyone, not even Mary. The Carter brothers were seen more often without her, their eyes harder, their voices quieter, and though no one dared ask outright, everyone felt the same gnawing suspicion the brothers were grooming Mary to replace the woman who had brought her into the world. Late that autumn, an unfamiliar doctor was seen arriving at the Carter home. His car had no license plates and he left before dawn. No one knew his name, no one saw him return. But a week later, Samuel was over here, in the feed store, bragging in his slow, deliberate way that the Carter line will live on just as it should. It was only much later, years later, that the town understood what he had meant. By then, Mary was gone from sight entirely, and the truth of what happened inside that house would never appear in any ledger or record book, only in whispers, only in the eyes of those who remembered seeing her in that window. By the spring of 1957, the Carter farm felt more like a sealed tomb than a family home. The windows were always shuttered, the yard overgrown, the path to the front porch swallowed in weeds. No one saw Mary in town anymore, not even at church, where the Carters had once kept up appearances. It was the postman who first noticed something strange. He said the mail for the Carters was never taken from the box. It simply disappeared overnight. No one ever saw who came for it. He claimed, though he admitted it might have been his imagination, that he once saw a pale hand slip out from behind the door and snatch the letters in a single jerking motion before vanishing again. The rumors grew worse. A traveling salesman swore he'd heard soft singing from inside the house one evening. Not a hymn, not a song he knew, but something slow and circular, like a child's lullaby sung over and over again without end. Others whispered that Samuel had begun introducing Mary to a special visitor who came at night, a man no one recognized, who always arrived in a black overcoat and never spoke to anyone. Eliza's death was never officially recorded. One day, she was simply gone. The brothers told the pastor she had gone to stay with relatives up north, but no one believed them. A neighbor swore she saw the brothers digging in the far field the same week, working late into the night by the light of a single lantern. And then, Mary reappeared. It was a market day in early summer when she was seen again, walking between Samuel and Thomas as though no time had passed. But she was different. Her belly was round beneath her faded blue dress. She held her head low, and her hair hung in greasy ropes. Samuel bought her a jar of molasses, Thomas a small sack of candy drops, and then they led her away before anyone could speak to her. No one saw her again after that, not for decades. The Carter farm eventually rotted into the earth, the house collapsing under its own weight. The brothers died within months of each other, their graves marked by the cheapest stones money could buy. But Mary's grave? There isn't one. Some say Mary left town after the brothers' deaths, that she boarded a train in the middle of the night and vanished into the wider world. But those who knew the Carters best, the ones who had lived under their shadow, will tell you Mary never left that farm, that whatever happened to her was buried there, just like Eliza. In 1983, a group of teenagers broke into the ruins of the Carter house on a dare. They said the floorboards in the upstairs bedroom were warped and soft, as if something had been rotting beneath them for years. One boy swore he found a scrap of fabric under the boards, stained brown with age, that looked like it had once been part of a faded blue dress. Another claimed he saw a small wooden cradle in the corner, too small for the baby it might have once held, but still rocking gently when no one had touched it. By then, the legend had settled into the bones of the town. People spoke of Mary Carter in hushed voices, not because they feared her, but because they feared what her story revealed. That blood, when folded back on itself for too many generations, doesn't just twist the body, it twists the mind. The Carter brothers had been determined to keep their line pure, but in the end, they had created something that could never belong in the daylight. No official record of Mary's child exists, no birth certificate, no name, just the whispers that someone, something, lived in that upstairs room for a short time and then was gone. In 1994, the county approved the demolition of what was left of the Carter home. During the process, workers claimed they uncovered a shallow pit near the far field, lined with stones. Inside were fragments of bone, too small to be an adult, too brittle to identify. The sheriff at the time dismissed it as animal remains. But those who remembered the Carter story never believed that. Today the land is just overgrown grass and a few leaning fence posts. But if you walk it on a still night, some say you can hear it, the faint creak of a cradle, the slow hum of a lullaby sung in a voice that never learned what it meant to be free. And maybe, just maybe, that's because Mary Carter never really left at all.